Hi everyone. Today we're going to talk about the sun's path at zenith. Let's get started. So remember, the sun is at its highest point at noon. Noon is when a location on Earth is directly facing the sun, kind of like in this area over here. When you're at a location and that location is starting to face the sun, that location is at noon. When you're at a location and that location is opposite the sun, kind of around here, that location is at midnight. So when you're at noon, when you're facing the sun is actually at its highest point in the sky, but how high exactly the sun goes in the sky depends on the location you're in, for instance, the latitude, as well as the season you're in. And remember, as the sun is setting, you're moving away from the rotating away from the sun. And when the sun is rising, you're rotating towards the sun. Now, zenith is the location in the celestial sphere that is directly above the observer. The celestial sphere is just an imaginary sphere we use to map different celestial objects in the sky, their positions. And when a celestial object is directly above your head, we call that zenith, 90-degree angle. And when something is directly in front of you, we call that horizon. So the sun is only at zenith actually in specific locations that receive sunlight at a direct angle, 90 degrees. So only at locations on Earth where the sun's rays are hitting those locations at a 90-degree angle, those are the only locations on Earth that see the sun directly overhead. Other locations don't see the sun directly above or overhead or at zenith. The sun is normally a little lower in the sky. So, for instance, if you're somewhere over here near the equator, for instance, and the sun's rays are hitting you at a direct angle, a 90-degree angle, you're going to see the sun directly above your head. But if you're at a higher latitude, kind of like where we are in New York, then you're going to start, the sun will never hit directly at 90-degree angle in those latitudes. And that's why you'll never see in the higher latitudes, the sun will never be directly overhead or at zenith. So New York is around 42-degree north latitude, and that's a little higher than this area. This is not drawn to scale. And in New York, the sun's rays never at a 90-degree angle. The higher the latitude is, or closer to the poles you are, the angle of the sun's rays are less. They're not at 90 degrees. It's a lower angle of insolation, and that's why you never see the sun directly above or overhead. But in lower latitudes, like the equator, 90-degree north, and are also around 23.5-degree north, Tropic of Cancer, and 23.5 degrees south, Tropic of Capricorn, in between these areas is where the sun's rays hit around a 90-degree angle. They're lower in latitude, right? They're closer to zero. And lower latitudes have a higher angle of insolation. And that's why these areas near the equator are warmer as well. So let's write this down in your note packet. Lower latitudes, kind of like the equator and the Tropic of Cancer, Tropic of Capricorn, anywhere in between these areas, have a higher angle of insolation, and that's why those locations are warmer. And remember, I said the sun is never directly overhead or at zenith in New York because we're around a 42-degree north latitude location, and the sun is always at an angle here. It's at a lower angle of insolation. And that's why in New York, the sun is never above you, directly above your head. It's the highest point of the sun is more towards the south, as you can see. It's never above, directly above. Let's write this down. The sun directly overhead or at zenith, kind of like this image right here, is never in New York. New York never sees the sun directly overhead. Um, so in the summer solstice or June 21st, we've said this before, the sun's direct rays or the sun's rays are hitting at a 90-degree angle at the Tropic of Cancer, 23.5-degree north. So since the sun's rays are hitting at a 90-degree angle here, people at this location on June 21st will experience the sun directly overhead, kind of like this. So if we saw this or drew this in the celestial sphere, so for on June 21st, at 23.5-degree north latitude, this area right here, these people would see the sun directly overhead or at zenith. And this only happens at this date, June 21st. Let's write that down. On June 21st, the Tropic of Cancer, or at 23.5-degree north, the sun is directly overhead or at zenith. Notice that this location, or this image right here, is just to show you what zenith looks like directly overhead. The actual path of the sun is different in these different locations. So just know that the zenith, or the sun directly above overhead, is on June 21st at Tropic of Cancer. During the winter solstice, or December 21st, the sun's rays are hitting at a 90-degree angle at the Tropic of Capricorn this time, which is 23.5 degrees south. So any people that are living on the Tropic of Capricorn will see the sun directly above their head. And if you drew this in the celestial sphere, then you would draw the sun directly above the person on this date at this latitude, 23.5 degrees south. And let's write this down. On December 21st, the sun is directly overhead at the Tropic of Capricorn, 23.5 degrees south. Finally, during the equinoxes, March or 21st or September 21st, around that time, the sun's direct rays, or a 90-degree angle rays, are directly at the equator. And that's why people at the equator on these dates will see the sun directly above, or at zenith, kind of like this. And this image shows the sun's path in the different seasons as well at the equator. So at the equator, on these dates, March 21st or September 23rd, around these dates, the sun will rise in the east, set due west, and be directly above the person's head at noon. On June 21st, however, summertime, the sun will rise more northeast and set more northwest, and it will not be directly above the person's head, although it will be very high in the sky. And then on December 21st, the sun will rise in the southeast, set in the southwest, and be still high up, but not directly overhead. So the only time the sun is directly overhead is on March 21st and September 23rd at the equator. Let's write this down. So at the equator on March 21st and September 21st, the sun is directly overhead. You just need to remember the different dates and the different latitudes at which you see the sun at zenith. And remember, the sun is never at zenith in New York. So let me show you two simulations to talk about what happens in the poles. The poles are special. So if you look at this image, um, we're very close to the poles in this area. So say we're at the poles, this red dot, and when um, let's see, on June 21st, around this time, notice that if I hit play, the poles, North Pole specifically, never escape the sunlight because the Earth is tilted 23.5 degrees towards the sun. And different locations on Earth experience sunlight and then sunset or darkness, but the pole, especially the North Pole right here, does not escape the sun. And if I look at the sun's path at this time, so at 90-degree north latitude on June 21st, then notice that the sun is also not setting. It looks like it's just going around the person. And this is exactly what happens around the summertime in the North Pole. The sun does not set for months and months, about 6 months, because the North Pole just can't escape the sun. So if I move, so it starts around March 21st, right here, when um, the North Pole is just starting to experience the sunlight. And then in June 21st, it's still experiencing the same thing. It's sunlight throughout the day. There is no darkness, there is no sunset. And then on September 21st, it's still about the same. It can't really escape the sunlight. And then after this time, notice that the North Pole is in darkness. And if I go all the way to December 21st, notice that as the Earth is rotating, the North Pole cannot escape the darkness. So for about 6 months around this time, there's actually 24 hours of darkness. So for the North Pole, it's special because in the wintertime, the North Pole has 24 hours of darkness. And in the summertime, the North Pole has 24 hours of sunlight. And if I show you this here as well, on December 21st, why is this not working? There is no sun. The sun is so low in the sky. The North Pole never sees sunlight for, or does not see sunlight for 24 hours for 6 months in the wintertime. So let's go back over here. So the path, what does the sun's path look like in the North Pole? Well, between March 21st to September 21st, so from March 21st to June to September 21st, the sun actually does not set at all. It's constant sunlight, and the sun looks like it's just revolving around you. And it never sets, and it's low in the sky, kind of like this. So if I were to show you this in the celestial sphere, it would look something like this: the sun going around you. And then between September 22nd to December to March 20th, so after fall, throughout the winter up until spring, the sun does not rise in the North Pole. So if I drew the celestial sphere, you would not see the sun at all, and it's in complete darkness for 6 months straight. And it's actually the opposite in the South Pole, because between March 21st to September 21st and June as well, the South Pole is in complete darkness. It does not see any sunlight. So for 6 months straight for us in the summertime in the North Pole, the South Pole will have 24 hours of darkness for 6 months. And then over here, when the North Pole is experiencing complete darkness for 6 months, the South Pole is actually experiencing total sunlight for 6 months. The sun does not set. So whatever is happening in the North Pole, the opposite is happening in the South Pole. So let's write this down. The path in the poles: in the wintertime, the sun does not rise, and in the summertime, the sun does not set. And it would look kind of like this: the sun would revolve around you, or look like it's revolving around you in the celestial sphere. So, how else would you know that the location is in the North Pole? Remember, Polaris is a star, which is also called the North Star, that's directly above the North Pole. So, if you're a person in the North Pole, you should see the Polaris, the star, at zenith at all times, right above you. So, one way to know that you're in the North Pole is that Polaris is at zenith right above you. Another way to know it is because the sun does not set in the summertime in the North Pole. So in the summertime, the sun would look like it's revolving around you, very low in the sky. And then in the wintertime, the sun does not rise. So for 6 months straight in the winter, you would see that there is no sun in the sky. And Polaris is always at zenith. So that's it. Go ahead and try the question.